This is the homie Hangout, obviously, where we help others move in excellence. And I'm really looking forward to this today. So, all of you know, I'm sure by now, and I had done a live about this a while back, right? About the incident with a lady named Candice Reed. She was a math teacher at a high school in Riverside County, and she put on just a ridiculous show, basically, of dancing around, mocking Native culture, and it was recorded by somebody in the classroom, and it went viral all over the world, actually. And now we have the whistleblower, so to speak. And so I'll go ahead and introduce her, and we'll get into this conversation. So her name is Akale Brown. She is Taos Pueblo and Kanaka Maoli Hawaiian native. Hopefully I mentioned that, or hopefully I said that right. Okay, good. And yeah, so let's go. So how did you become aware of this situation, right? The whole Candice Reed episode.
Well, um, basically, what happened was maybe I shouldn't start at like what happened from the students' standpoint, but more like after the family took this to the administration.
Sure.
So the student, obviously didn't put this on the internet, right? They gave it to, it somehow got into my hands and then was put on the internet. The student did what they were supposed to do and take it to the principal. So they took it directly to the principal like they were supposed to. And after viewing the whole video, which is over 5 minutes, it's almost 6 minutes long in its entirety, the principal looked up at the family and said, "You might be in trouble. You might, have violated a school policy of some sort."
Wow.
And obviously the parents were like, "Okay, this is ridiculous, it's clearly inappropriate content. The teacher shouldn't have been doing that." And the first response is to ridicule the student for taking the video. Had the student not taken the video, would anyone have believed that story? She was dancing, jumping up and down. She got up and, climbed on 2 desks, ran around the class. Would anyone believe that if there wasn't no video?
Yeah, highly unlikely. Yeah.
When the family got home, they were just like, "What should we do?" They're not social media people. They don't even have social media. They're just like regular 9 to 5, just average family, just trying to get by in the city, like any other Native family that's trying to get by in the city. And I'm kind of known as a youth advocate. Well, I am known as a youth advocate, but specifically foster youth. But not only that, I have 2 degrees in Native American studies, one from Santa Barbara and one from UC Davis. So I spent a lot of time researching tribes, federal Indian law, and history. So I kind of have like a different perspective because I've worked in the family courts, the children's courts with foster youth. And then I also have this like long history of educational background in Native American history.
Right.
So I was asked to just take a look at the video and see what I thought. And after watching the video, my entire body like began to shake from head to toe. And like the reason I chose your channel is because like I've never really said this before publicly, is I'm a former gang member myself.
Wow.
And yeah, and you've been hitting me up and so I don't feel comfortable going on most, like talking to most news. I've turned down so much press, like I've turned down every major network, but I felt more comfortable here because I'm like, this is a community that I feel more comfortable with. They'll understand me, and that's why I felt comfortable. A lot of natives get into gangs when they grow up in the city. So
yeah. Well, I'm humbled to have you here. I did not know that. That's not something that's come up in our conversations before.
But yeah, like I've been around gang violence. I've seen things like you know, I'm not somebody that like shies away from graphic material, but for some odd reason, this video affected me more so than like violence that I've seen in person. Like I was shaking from head to toe. It was like, I can't even explain the way it made me feel. And I knew that it was so bad that if somebody didn't put it out, it would be swept under the rug, because these things happen every single year all over the country, and it's swept under the rug.
Right. And aside from the public attention, nobody's prepared to have to deal with that as a family, right? You know, you wake up and you go to school, you wake up and you go to work, you, like you say, you just live your life, and all of a sudden you're thrust into this situation that's not only deeply personal, but now everybody else is invested in it as well to some degree. And so I can imagine that's another layer of trauma and confusion in itself, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so you so you watched it, you felt it needed to, you know, to be out there, so it makes its way out there. I think it's ridiculous, in case anybody had missed this part when you said it, that the school administration, the principal, sought to all of a sudden turn around and get defensive and blame the student, right, for what's clearly, you know, just unacceptable adult behavior. And that criminalization happens a lot, right?
Right.
So so it goes public. It gets, you know, a lot of attention. There was a lot of back and forth with the district, correct?
Mm-hmm. Well, basically, people kind of rushed into the district and decided to kind of bombard them without checking in with the spokesperson, the family, and what the plan was going to be. Right. And so it's really sad, because like all of the demands, they weren't really demands, they're more like asks, like, this is what we want, you know?
Right.
They were kind of overshadowed by other people's narrative and what they wanted to fight for, which was to fire her. And see, that's not what the family, they wanted something much bigger than that. They wanted to see Native history be implemented into schools nationwide. So more than just the district, because this video went worldwide. Right. You know, this could have been, or it still can be, turned into legislation, you know, and that's what the family wanted to fight for. And so that's the message I delivered. But because I delivered that message and it countered what the people on the ground wanted, it just kind of like, it started a lot of like confusion, infighting. And then what that did was turn off like people who weren't Native, or people who are Indigenous, and they're trying to find their, you know, culture. They're trying to learn about Native politics. They're trying to, you know, get into it. They were like kind of scared away or turned off because the leadership was fighting. And, you know, everything, I decided, okay, well, if this is just going to be everyone attacking me for literally delivering a message, I'm literally the messenger. Right. And I'm getting beat up. Yeah. And my family is getting beat up. I said, okay, I'm just going to back off. And I said, I won't do anything anymore. And then about a month passes by and nothing goes on. It's like quiet. Nothing. There's no protest. There's nothing happening on the Candice Reed front. And I'm like, okay, well, the ball's been dropped. And, you know, this is losing momentum. Nobody's talking about turning this into, you know, Native history nationwide. And so that's when I kind of came back on and was like, restarting the conversation. And so that's pretty much how it went. I don't want to get into particulars or name names because it'll just drum up the drama again. But it was a learning experience, and I hope the other side learns, it's much easier to work together in the future, than it is. We're so much stronger together than we are apart.
Very, very true. Very true. And so maybe looking at it from kind of your scholarly perspective, right? Your academic perspective. I'm assuming that that's something that you've recognized in other social movements and other efforts in the past, right?
It happens.
Yes. Yeah. I guess that's
hijacking of movements.
There you go.
Or inserting yourself into the narrative. There's different ways to say it, but yeah. And I've read about it, like in my history classes, like in African American history, Native American history. It's happened. There have been like big civil rights organizations that have split up in the past and turned into two separate organizations because people couldn't get along. But they have the same exact fight. And so I've seen it. It's definitely history repeating itself. I didn't want the attention that the other people really wanted. I have not enjoyed being in the spotlight. It hasn't been fun, and it hasn't really been beneficial for me or my family. Right. It's been very hard. And, I haven't lived in fear in a really long time. And now, I kind of am going back to that, constantly looking and making sure nobody's around. And it's I'm back in the hood, and I don't even live in the hood anymore. I literally live in Colorado now, and it's not LA where I'm from, in Pacoima.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, Pacoima. So and I want to pick up there, but there's a few people in the chat that are unfamiliar with the Candice Reed situation, and so if you don't mind, for someone that hasn't seen the video, what are we talking about?
Okay. Well, basically, this happened on October. I believe it was October 20th was the date it happened, or October 19th of 2021. A math teacher, was getting ready for a trigonometry lesson. And prior to starting that lesson, she told all the students to turn off their phones and put them away in their book bags, or put them away. And then she proceeded to take out a feather headdress that she made at home and some painted rocks. And she started telling them an ancient Indian tale. And it was called Sokotoa. Now, Sokotoa is a trigonometry lesson, and it's supposed to teach you cosine, sine, and tangent, which are trigonometry words or variables. I don't know what they're called, but it's the terminology you use when you're doing those math equations. Okay. And so she was trying to teach them that by saying Sokotoa as a name, an Indian name. Okay. And so she's telling them this elaborate story, and it goes on for a while. And she knows there's a Native student in her class. It's not like she doesn't know the student's Native. This student outwardly dresses and appears, because we're in the times where Natives are starting to actually embrace the Native fashion. They're starting to wear jewelry. They're starting, the younger generation are wearing ribbon skirts. So everyone's embracing the fashion aspect. So this student, you could tell the student was Native. Mm-hmm. This isn't the 90s, and, he wasn't necessarily blending in. And so the student was feeling really uncomfortable, obviously, because she's, doing tomahawk chops, and she's doing shrieking noises with her voice to mimic Native chanting and prayer. Mm-hmm. basically our religion.
Yeah.
And so he decides he's going to turn, the phone on and go ahead and record. And it went on for almost 6 whole minutes. So if you think about the time, all that time before the 6 minutes, this could have gone on for well over 10 minutes.
Wow.
And it was unreasonable for the simple purpose of the students had no idea what she was doing. She didn't reveal to them what any of it meant until the very, very end. And it was a gasp. The whole class gasped and said, "No, you didn't." And she's like, "Yes, I did."
Wow.
And that's what was her response.
Wow. And I don't think very many people, comparative to who saw little clips here and there, whether on the news or social media, I don't think many actually saw the whole thing.
Only people who came to my Instagram had access to the full video because I put it up in 2 parts, and then I put it on TikTok. But my TikTok I've been deplatformed from TikTok, so I don't have it anymore. And I had over 90,000 followers.
Wow.
And I lost that platform, which sucks because it could have been used like for amazing good, in the future. But I can start over. No worries. But yeah, I did have it up on Instagram and TikTok. Those are the only 2 places you can see the entire video.
Okay, gotcha. So in case anybody didn't catch that, Instagram and TikTok, but your Instagram now is private, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's because of the ongoing stuff and wanting to keep my family safe. I decided I'll just keep it private and stay to myself,
Right. And no, and again, not to be redundant, but I appreciate you coming on here. But what about because obviously Candice Reed is not the only one in the country that feels like what she did was okay, right? And generally, when marginalized people speak up, then of course there's a counter to that. Did you or your family or other folks that you're aware of experience kind of public backlash? You're going to the store and all of a sudden somebody starts yelling at you or that kind of thing.
No, not necessarily. Not that specifically, but on TikTok there was like a lot of white supremacists coming on my TikTok and like saying, hey colonized, because now that's what they say to all natives on TikTok.
Wow.
But yeah, so that got flipped around, which is great because that was never a thing before. And now we have to deal with that. It sucks. I dealt with so many DMs of just hate, like, oh my God, telling me to kill myself. Like, I don't know how many people told me to kill myself, but that was a big one. And that, like no one ever outwardly said, I'm going to do this to you. I'm going to do this. But they said, I wish this would happen to you.
Right.
And I hope someone does this to you. So those were the types of threats and like, kill me and stuff like that. And it was scary.
Sure.
And it was, it was scary. I mean, because at the end of the day, it wasn't like I had a million people. I had a lot of people like it and agree with me, but I didn't have a million people that are like, I want to stand and fight with you. How can I help?
Actually, can you expand on that a little bit to the extent that you're comfortable?
It was hard because the people, like Martin Luther King said, he said, in the end, you won't remember the words of your enemies, but you'll remember the silence of your friends.
Yeah.
And that spoke volumes to me because my closest friends, people I've known 20 years, disappeared on me.
Wow.
They didn't, a lot of, they're all working. They got families now. Like, they're not activists. We're not teenagers anymore. We're not in college anymore. Like, we have kids and families, right? Like, and people didn't want to put themselves in danger just by seeing how I was being treated. Like a lot of people I've known, they didn't return my phone calls or my texts when I was asking, like, can you support me in Riverside? And it hurt because now those same exact people are apologizing now that it's all over.
Right.
But it's a little too late,
Yeah.
It's
That's
already over.
And to use kind of a gangbanging reference, right? Sometimes there's
I'm like, what happened?
right,
Y'all supposed to have my back, boo,
right. It's sometimes there's seasons of there's seasons of violence, and people wind up passing away, and people get cases and everything else, and so things get kind of quiet in the neighborhood for a minute, and it seems like then everybody wants to come out of the woodwork, right?
Wow.
And it is like you weren't, you know, now you want to claim the fame when there's not as much work and there's not as much risk, right? When you don't actually have to put skin in the game. So that's crazy that happens in social movements and in.
Yeah, I almost was gonna call people from Pacoima to come because I was literally getting, I was like, I know a lot of my friends are parolees, but I'm sure they would come down here and back me up, And my ex, I probably well, I don't care. I'll say it. My ex, his dad is the president of Duke's Car Club.
Okay, yeah. Shout out
so I grew up. I know a lot of people, and I'm like, why is this? But I ended up just handling it myself. I brought my family. We did it in a good way. We went down to Riverside, and we did it in a good way, and there wasn't any violence. So,
and that's good.
It was just all internet talk.
Right. But I think sometimes people underestimate. Internet talk can get to stinging too, right? It's especially when it piles on, and I would imagine in your case because it's not like you did what Candice Reed did, right?
I felt like it.
Right.
It felt like it. And then I would tell these people when they're coming at me crazy, I would say, I really wish I didn't release that video so you wouldn't be over here harassing me right now. Because I'm like, that's really what, I'm like, I just literally gave you a green light on me.
Yeah.
For why? You're supposed to be on my side.
Right.
So it was, it's hard. They say crabs in a bucket, like it's not a joke. It's real.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's sad.
It is. And so you being in Riverside just naturally means that you're having to travel over there, right? So uh it's how was it for your family in terms of because they're watching, I'm sure, and seeing what you're going through. uh how challenging was that for them, and kind of how did they manage that?
Yeah. It was hard because I lost my job at the beginning of all of this. Like I got, so inundated with messages and people like putting crazy reviews on my business. Like I had a business page. I ended up taking it down on Facebook because I got crazy reviews on there. And it was just really hard because I was just starting this job and it was really good pay. And I was like, I was happy I was finally going to be in like a good place. And the video like kind of threw a wrench in all of that because it took so much time, like for me just to filter through comments and to like delete and block and like, because I was getting inundated. Like my phone was like ding, 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 ding. It like never stopped. And it was quick. And that was like comments only. And so I was trying to keep up. And then I got really depressed. Like I had these people putting out whole paragraphs and memes about me, talking about me. And I'm like, I literally just released this video a week or two ago.
Wow.
And so I ended up missing work for a few days because I just couldn't mentally get out of bed.
Sure.
Like I was too overwhelmed by all of it. And I ended up losing my job. I just had to resign because I was so embarrassed by all of it. And I was making a fool out of myself, like not showing up. And I just started. So I've lost like a lot of money by not working.
Right.
And then my other business that I do is sewing. And so in like our native belief system, we believe like when you're upset, you're angry, or you're sad, you can't sew or you can't bead, because your energy, all the energy you put into your work, it goes into the clothing. And so then somebody's going to wear that.
Right.
And then you're putting all this anger or sadness into that, and then somebody's going to wear that. So like in our like practice, you don't sew or bead. And so for months I couldn't work. And people don't understand, like, well, why couldn't you just do it? And I'm like, well, I probably could have done it. It would have taken me like 10 times longer than normal. But it would have been really bad energy.
Right.
And so I just like helped my husband with his small business that he has, and I would just do that on the side. But like we really struggled for, all through Christmas. We struggled into January. And then the very first time I asked for if people could donate so I could get gas money, go down to Riverside. These people put up paragraphs saying that I live off of donations,
Right.
and that I'm a career activist, and that's all I do for a living is live off of donations. And in that first time that we got donations, I only raised $310.
Wow. Yeah. So and that's some of the stuff. I'm sure that some of this stuff is not kind of the easiest to talk to or recount. Talk about or recount. But I think it's important for people to hear, right? That it sometimes things happen and you wonder why people don't quote unquote make a big deal out of it, right? Well, and this is why, because then you become the enemy, and you could wind up becoming the enemy even in the circle of your own people. It takes an emotional toll, it takes a physical toll, it takes a financial toll, um, and it's all to do the right thing, and uh, and so it's hard to blame people for not wanting to step out in front. But at minimum, we could do a better job of supporting those who do. When it happens, and maybe that would encourage more. Um, and I had noticed this the other day that you know Candice gets fired, right? Finally, just last month, and but I think it was a 3-1 or 4-1 vote. And do you know? And if you do, would you be comfortable sharing who and maybe even the rationale? Like, who's the administrator that did not want to see her fired?
Oh, yeah. That was Dale Kinnear, the guy that was her boss at North High School in Riverside. And so that's the other thing. Here's the other thing. So I went to school in Riverside in high school.
Okay.
When I was in foster care, because I grew up in foster care. A lot of people don't know that, but I say it, and I say it proudly, because I'm sick and tired of everyone treating us like we're criminals or we're animals. Because we're just like normal kids. We just grew up in the system.
Right.
And so I always tell people, and they're all shocked. They get all, and I'm like, it's not that big of a deal. It's fine.
Right.
But yeah, Dale Kinnear. So that's why also I released the video too. And I decided I would, because that's a district that I went to school in. It's not like I was just some guy. No, I went to school there too. I lived in Riverside.
Yeah.
And so I felt a connection to this as well. And I was applying to UC Riverside, and I got in. I just found out I'd got in, and I was in the process of figuring out how I was going to move me and my family down to Riverside.
Oh, okay.
So I was moving out there when all this started. But anyways, going back to your question, Dale Kinnear was working at North High when Candice Reed was hired. So he hired her, and he worked with her for, I believe, a total of 8 years. They worked together, and he was the person who approved her lesson plan of SOCA TOA.
So that was a written out plan. That wasn't just her. And maybe you could touch on it, on that.
Hmm.
What is some of the stuff that you learned? I know there was a lot of questions up front. Has she done this before? Is it a first offense? What is the context? So, and and you guys wound up learning a lot about her and her past in terms of the school.
Yeah. So, SOCOTOA is actually a lesson plan that's been used nationwide in the United States since like the 60s. It's been around that long.
So
it's a racist lesson plan that's been used in high schools all over the country. And yes, today there are math teachers that will defend it and say, no, this is how it's been done. And they'll defend it.
wow.
Yeah.
And when you say a
Mhm.
lesson plan, just to to zero in on it, so it's not just a lesson plan on paper, but the way that she exacted that lesson is is how you're supposed to do it according to the lesson plan. Like
Yes and no. I
okay,
think she went a little extra theatrical with it. I think she took it to 100,
right.
but yeah, most of them will just like, sometimes they'll put on the Indian headdress, and they'll do the Sokotoa chant, and they'll tell the story of the magic rocks, or they'll tell the story of the water goddess, or,
Wow.
the chief will stub his toe and he'll say, oh, my toe. And like, there's different ways it's been taught that I've read. But there on Google, there was a PowerPoint of how to teach Sokotoa. And we found that when this very first happened, other activists, people who have been keeping an eye on all this stuff for me to help,
Right.
they let me know that since, all this happened, worldwide media attention, that specific lesson plan was deleted, but there's still other references to it, and you can find them easily, and they're shareable. They're printable lessons on Google.
That is insane.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important for people to catch that she was not just some rogue teacher flying off the hook. That it's actually the framework of that ridiculousness is standard procedure for decades upon decades. It goes to show how much work there still is to do. And so learning that, is that part of what influenced the desire for um some of the response to this being just designing, if not redesigning um native curriculum, period. It,
Right. Well, yeah. It did bring a larger conversation to the table nationwide. Each state individually, had a lot of people are using this to level, their arguments against their own districts about history, about mascots. This Everything that's happened with Candice Reed and her getting fired has empowered a lot of natives to take on their districts, and it's happening throughout the country. But in Riverside specifically, they have a native task force with people from local tribes, local educators, local native educators from different tribes who already work on curriculum. Like, that's what they do.
mm-hmm.
And some of them, they're not actually educators, but they are from the local tribes. So at least their voice, they have a seat at the table for once, which is huge, because they get a say so in what may or may not be put into your curriculum.
Okay.
Which is good, because I think like you shouldn't necessarily have to have a 4-year degree for your voice to count.
Absolutely.
So that's what I believe. But
right.
so that's happening, and yes, they are working on curriculum. But something amazing that's happening is Cherokee Nation, the tribe, has put in a lot of resources into their education department to create a curriculum from K through 12 that they can supply to school districts nationwide. And so that's in the works, and it's in the final stages.
Okay.
So Yeah,
And
it's
that,
coming.
yeah, no, that is an accomplishment. And when you what you think in terms of that dovetailing with the legislation and effort that's moving forward in terms of some people call it critical race theory, some people call it ethnic studies, uh, but the mandated inclusion of those classes, uh, you think that makes the curriculum that the Cherokee Nation is coming up with more likely to be implemented, since some schools have to do this anyways, right? They're gonna have to get the
Right.
stuff from somewhere. Um,
It can definitely be part of it because ethnic studies embodies all ethnicities. So
mm,
ethnic studies is going to be Native American studies, African American studies, Chicano studies, Asian American studies, and I think like gender and inclusion
mm-hmm.
studies or equity, something like that, and then women's studies. So like that's, or I don't know if women's studies falls in it, but I had to get for ethnic studies. But anyways, yeah, that those are the components of ethnic studies.
Mm.
So and you can't have ethnic studies without Chicano studies. You can't have it without African American studies. It's an embodiment of all of us, because that way a student gets a more well-rounded view of what our communities have been through individually and as a whole.
True. No, I agree. I agree.
And I think like, yes, I think that this Native American component like can be used toward that, but they still have to do those other components, the Asian Americans, especially right now with everything that's going on with Asians being beat to death all over the country. We need Asian American studies in schools like as soon as possible.
Yeah. And I agree. Thank you for all that you sacrificed and endured to draw attention to this Candice Reed scenario. I know the journey was ridiculous in a host of different ways. And so thank you for that. And thank you for your family. You didn't have to do it. You didn't have to do it. And but I'd like to believe that some people are better off because you did, right? So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on and being persistent.
Yeah.
Because I was like, finally when I was ready to talk, everybody's like, oh no, that story is last year.
Yeah.
I'm like, so I'm grateful that, for everyone that's listening too.
Yeah. It worked out. So thank you. We let's connect again soon.
Okay.
All right. Well, blessings to you and yours. I appreciate you.
You too.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
This is the homie Hangout, man. Help others move with excellence. Help yourself at the same time.